Hey everyone, this is Brandon from Web Design Tuts, and today we're going to be recording the first part of a longer screencast series that we're going to be working on for how to create your own web background patterns. This is going to be an accompaniment to the written versions of all these tutorials. In this particular edition, we're going to be starting out with some of the very basic, most fundamental principles behind creating some of these background patterns. In our case, we're going to be creating four very, very simple patterns. The first one is this basic grid pattern. The next one is this crosshatch pattern. Then we're going to show you guys how to create and customize your own line patterns. And then we're going to basically walk you guys through how to create your own tile. And in that case, we're going to be adding some color and just a little bit of texture to one of these patterns. If you guys have been doing this for quite a while, this might be really, really basic stuff. So this first part of the series is going to be just kind of a refresher. For everybody else who's just kind of getting into this stuff, this is going to be a fantastic place to start out because we're going to go over some of the principles behind, creating these patterns in Photoshop, but also being able to use them on the web and vice versa. So let's go ahead and dive in here. The first one we're going to create is this grid pattern. So we're just going to start out by creating a new document. Nothing crazy is going to be going on this one. We're going to start out with a document that's going to be 7 pixels by 7 pixels. The reason we're doing that is basically because we want to have space for one line down the center with an equal space on either side. The first thing we want to do is, obviously our document is really, really small, so let's zoom into 1200% or 1600%, whatever you're more comfortable with. And I'm going to grab my line tool. And I'm just going to go ahead and set the color to something dark. You can use red, you can use whatever you want. And I'm going to start a new layer, and I'm just going to draw a line down the center. Now in this case, I'm holding down the Shift key because we don't want any angles or anything like that at this point. And there is our line. Now one thing that's kind of funny in Photoshop is, obviously we've drawn a 1 pixel line, and the width is up here in case you guys are wondering where that's at. But it appears to be occupying 2 pixels of space. Why is that? Well, Photoshop tends to kind of eyeball it. In this case, if you were to zoom back out to 100% and see this in a really big document, this would look like a 1 pixel line. But it's not, because it's kind of halfway occupying 2 different parts of the space. So what we want to do is select the Convert Point tool that's under the Pen tool panel, and we're just going to go ahead and pick our shape right here, and I'm just going to basically click and drag around so I grab all 4 points of this line. And I'm now using the keyboard just to kind of nudge this over until I get it about to the right place. Now you're going to notice even at 1600% zoom we still have a little very light shadow next to this. So we're going to show you guys how to get rid of that next. So let's go ahead and create a new layer. We're going to select both the new layer and the old shape layer. Then we're going to hit Control E, and that's going to merge it and rasterize it, which is kind of what we want at this point. So next I'm going to go ahead and delete on either side of this line just to kind of clean it up and make sure the only pixels visible on this are this single straight line. So that's about right. Next I'm going to go ahead and make a selection of that line and hit Control J, and that's going to create a duplicate copy. And now we simply want to rotate it 90 degrees to the right. And to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and go here under the Transform panel. And once again, just to be safe, because Photoshop tends to kind of do some funky things when you're transforming things, I'm just going to go ahead and clean up using the, again, Marquee Selection tool, and then hitting the Delete button on the layer, right? Okay, cool. So what we have here is your most very basic grid pattern. So how do we get this thing into the library of patterns? Well, we're going to go to the Edit panel and then hit Define Pattern right here. If you guys don't see that for some reason, you may need to change what layer you're selected on. Sometimes this will kind of be grayed out and you'll get Define Custom Shape if you're on a vector shape. But in this case, it's working out. So let's go ahead and hit Define Pattern. It's going to ask us to give it a name. At this point, this is fine. And now what we want to do is we want to test this thing out. So let's go ahead and open up a new document. Let's set it to, say, 600 by 400. The only thing we're going to be doing in this document is testing out our various different patterns as we build them. So we're going to draw two rectangles on this screen. This is really, just kind of rough work at this point. All we're doing is we're going to be setting up two different rectangles so we can compare one pattern against the other pattern as we apply them to each rectangle. So let's go ahead and apply the pattern to one of these first ones. Now, if you guys haven't done this before, what you basically want to do is select your layer on the right side of it, double click it, and you're going to get the Layer Styles panel, and then from here we want to go down and find the Pattern Overlay, and then anytime we define a new pattern, it's going to show up at the very end of our list. So let's go ahead and apply that, and now you can see we have this pattern applied over our rectangle layer. You guys can kind of mess around with this kind of stuff, to kind of adjust how dark it is from there. But that's our basic pattern. Now, the problem with this particular pattern is, it works just fine as a pattern, but if we were to use it on the web, it's going to be really, really hard to read text over it, simply because it's too high intensity, it's too high contrast, and it's going to distract from the content itself. So what we want to do is go back over here. Let's go ahead and merge these two layers just to be safe. And what we're going to do now is let's give it a new color overlay. And let's go ahead and select a very light color. I think inside the demo we used F3 across the board. So you guys may not even be able to see it on the video itself, but we have a very, very light gray pattern over a white background. So let's go ahead and once again select Define Pattern. And you're going to notice as we're going through this tutorial that we're doing a lot of this kind of stuff where we're just kind of defining a new pattern, making some adjustments and testing it out. So let's go ahead and define our new pattern. Again, it's going to show up at the end of our list. And now you're going to see that we have a very, very light gray subtle pattern. Now, just to kind of illustrate that effect that I was talking about, let's just go ahead and add some text here. And you're going to notice in this case, it's fairly readable. And if we drop it over this, the old pattern, obviously that's not very readable. So this is kind of what we're going for. This is something that's going to be too high intensity to use on the web with, text over it, because this is going to become unreadable. So, okay, fantastic. So we've created our first little pattern here. What you ask if you want to, for instance, have it be transparent. Right now, every time we use this thing, we're going to be able to see the white background behind it. Well, to do that, what we want to do is hide the background layer once we're creating this thing. We're going to go ahead and hit Define Pattern, and now you can see that there is a layer of transparency on the pattern itself. So again, let's go ahead and test that out. So we're just going to go ahead and grab this shape, and we're going to go over it, and we're going to go down and select our new transparent layer. Now what you can see here now is we have this light gray grid over a background color. And the cool thing about this is you can kind of mess around with the color itself, and you can still kind of see that pattern over it. And obviously later on you can kind of go back into this and mess with the blending mode so that you can kind of get the right effect that you're going for. This makes it really usable inside of Photoshop because it works seamlessly with the layer system. So you guys, if you want to work on the fly really quickly, this is the best way to do it. So okay, cool. So let's go ahead and go back to our old one. And the next pattern that we're going to want to be creating is this crosshatch pattern. It's going to be a little bit different from the grid pattern, even though it's a very similar design on a 45-degree angle. The main difference you're going to notice is that if all we do is rotate this little shape here by 45 degrees, and we may just go ahead have to draw these lines by hand. Okay, so the first thing you're going to be noticing here is the corners don't exactly match up perfectly on a 7 pixel by 7 pixel document. And what I mean by that is that the center is always going to be just a little bit off. And it's barely noticeable in this one, but you're just going to get some basic discrepancies. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new document at 8 pixels by 8 pixels. And once again, we're going to zoom in as close as we're comfortable with. We're going to grab the line tool, and all we're going to be doing here is drawing 2 diagonal lines across. And let's go ahead and copy that and duplicate it and move it across once again. And now the first thing you're going to notice here is once again when we drew that first vertical line in the grid pattern, it kind of had this feathering. That same effect is kind of multiplied whenever you draw diagonal lines, where you get these really jagged shapes. Once again, Photoshop is a raster system. It's based on a grid. So whenever you try to draw a diagonal line, Photoshop has a hard time doing it once you get really in close, because there really is no such thing as a perfect diagonal line in pixels. What you get is this kind of stepped pattern. So how are we going to deal with that? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and select the darker of the 2 lines, because it's the more pure, and we're just going to do something similar to what we did before, whereas we're just going to go ahead and merge these 2 layers. And this is going to seem kind of radical, but what we want to do is go through and using the marquee tool and just kind of hovering over using the keyboard and then using the delete key, we want to delete all these extra pixels. And I'm just going to go ahead and do that quickly here. And what you have here is what looks to be a very, kind of jagged line. But as you guys kind of work with this, you're going to notice that what's really jagged at 1600% is actually quite clean once you get down to 100%. So let's go ahead and test that out on our test document. Alright, so now you can see that. You have this nice kind of striped pattern going across. But it's still a little bit dark, obviously, so we could lighten that up if we wanted to. But how do we get the crosshatch pattern? So I'm just going to duplicate this, and to show you guys, let's go in again to, well, 3200 is fine. Let's go ahead and flip the layer by hitting transform and then flip horizontal. And we're just going to slide it on over. And there we go, we get this nice kind of crosshatch. So let's go ahead and make that a new pattern. And once again, we're working this a little bit darker than we need to, as to make sure you guys can see it over there on the video. Alright, so now we have this very nice, kind of crosshatch pattern. Obviously, we want to lighten it up just a little bit here. So what we're going to do is go ahead and merge those 2 layers. And once again, we're simply going to add a color over this. And we'll select a fairly light gray once again. And once again, we're simply going to hit Define Pattern. And finally, we are going to simply add this pattern over the rectangle to compare it. Alright, so there you have it. You have a nice, kind of simple crosshatch pattern. It's going to work great when you guys, kind of go to add text over it, and it's nice and subtle, so it adds enough, kind of character to your background without it being abrasive or, distracting from the content itself. All right, so we also kind of looked at how to create the diagonal pattern. One thing we didn't quite look at yet is how to make these lines a little bit further apart. So the next thing we want to do is go over that. What we want to do essentially is going to be just to make the canvas size a little bit bigger. So in our case, let's go ahead and make it 12 by 12. And I'm once again simply going to go through and delete these extra pixels just because they're not quite what I'm looking for. And in our case, we need to kind of make it a little bit longer and extend it. That looks about right. And let's go ahead and define this pattern now. And let's compare the 2 line patterns that we have side by side. So the first one was this one right here. And the second one, when we move the document from 8 pixels to 12 pixels, is going to be right here. So this may be obvious to most people out there, but the bigger the document, the wider the lines are from each other. The same thing is going to be working, with all of these different patterns that we've created. When you guys want to use them on the web, you're basically just going to go to the file and then save for web, document, and then from there we just want to save this out as a GIF file or a PNG or a JPEG. It's kind of up to you guys how you want to use it. And the same graphic is going to create the same kind of effect that we have inside of our test pattern document as well. So that's great. Okay, the final thing we want to go over today before we start getting into the more advanced stuff tomorrow is going to be tongue-tied there, how to create your own little tiles so you can kind of add your own colors and modifications to the pattern itself. So how do we do that? If we're working at a very small document size, obviously it's going to be tricky to get any texture whatsoever in something this small. So what we kind of want to do is start a new document. In this case, we're going to go at 100 by 100. And we're going to zoom in. Let's go ahead and zoom into 200% for now. And we're going to do a couple quick things here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create our texture pattern. Let's go back to the smaller version of this really quickly. Now I'll just crop it down. All right, and let's go ahead and make this a colorized version of the pattern. How we're going to do that, we'll just go ahead and draw a rectangle behind. And let's set a nice kind of, tan color to this. That looks about right. And once again, let's go ahead and add some color to this as well. In our case, we want to go with a color that's very similar to the background. That looks pretty good right there. Alright, so let's go ahead and make that a pattern. And we're going to draw a new rectangle over this new 100 pixel document. And let's just go ahead and drop that new pattern over. Alright, great. So if we go to 100%, you have a very simple pattern. It's nice, but it's really, really clean. And if we want to get a little bit of texture on that, so we kind of roughen it up just a little bit, we're going to need to add something over this tile. So once again, let's go to 200%. Let's create a new layer. And later on in this tutorial series, we're going to be dealing with some more advanced ways to kind of add this kind of texture. Today is all about the basics, so we're going to show you guys the most basic way to add this kind of thing. So what I'm doing here is I'm adding my brush tool, and so you guys can see it, we're going to use the color red for now. And we're just going to select a kind of irregular pattern here. And I'm just going to click once on my new layer. And obviously this is really, kind of bright and abrasive at this point. You can use the transform tool to kind of, mess around with how big this is and that kind of stuff. You can even go back and use the delete tool or the eraser to kind of, mess around with this just a little bit if it's a little bit too bright for you. But essentially what we want to do here is we want to make the color of that little piece of grunge right there the same color as the background so that it's barely visible at all. All it's really doing here is just kind of interfering with these pixels just enough so that when we make it into a pattern, it's going to have a nice effect to it. So let's go ahead and test it out very quickly here. Alright, so there you have it. But let's go ahead and zoom in, and I want you guys to notice one thing when we look at it closely, is that we have these seams right here where the pattern doesn't exactly meet. And this is going to be the final lesson in this tutorial, is how to get these patterns set up so that they are seamless. So how do we do that? When we were creating these smaller documents, we basically were working on a very fixed system where we didn't really have to worry too much about seams. All we had to do is make sure that things aren't off kilter like this. But the main things we're looking at is that this corner eventually is going to meet up perfectly with this corner, and the same thing for these two corners as well. So we want to get that same thing working in here. So I'm going to go ahead and let's go to 300%, see if that works. And I think we might be able to get to 400. That works perfectly. So again, we want to do the same thing. So what I want to do is I want to grab one of these corners and then scale out across our texture and grab another corner over here. And I'm going to be holding down the Shift tool. And we're just going to go ahead and grab it just like that. And if you guys can see, I have a corner here, I have a corner here. Perfect. So let's go ahead and create that into a pattern now. And you can see how it's grayed out, so we need to select a different layer. And let's go ahead and test that guy out. Alright, so you can see there's still a very light seam, so we're going to have to do one more really quick crop. In this case, I'm just going to take off 1 pixel. I think that might do the trick there. Let's go ahead and test it. And once again, you can kind of see that there is some trial and error involved here. There's still a very light seam there, so let's go ahead and do one more quick crop. Alright, let's try cutting off that last layer there, so this matches up perfectly when it repeats. And we'll go ahead and define the pattern one last time and test it out, and this should give us exactly what we're looking for here. Perfect. Okay, so now you guys can see that on the left side we have these kind of awkward seams, and on the right side we have no seams whatsoever. So the final step and the final kind of test here is going to be to simply zoom out and have a look at this. Now, you guys barely are going to be able to notice this, probably even less so on the video, but where we added that simple brush pattern over the grid pattern, you kind of have these little breaks up inside of the little pixel pattern. What that does is right here it just kind of creates a little bit of visual noise that makes it a little bit more interesting to look at than a simple clean version of that pattern. But in our case, it's also adding this a little bit of grunge that later on, if you guys want to mess with and add your own variations on this, you're going to know how to do it. So what we've gone over today is 4 very basic patterns. In the next part of this tutorial, we're going to dig into how to create some noise patterns. Later on, we're going to deal with some advanced textures and photographs and shapes and stuff like that. But I hope you guys got some of the basics out of this one, so that when we move on to the more advanced stuff, you're going to be ready. All right, so thanks a lot, you guys. I hope to see you guys on the next tutorial. Thanks a lot.